The transmission came through in a burst of static, sharp and erratic, cutting through the usual hum of the ISS Valiant's command deck. The crew fell silent as the message resolved into something recognizable. A voice, strained and frantic, pushing through the distortion. "This is Outpost Epsilon 9 HEHQ. We are under attack. The Deathworlder Fleet is on the move. A surge of white noise drowned the words. Then the voice returned, raw with desperation. "They are not here to negotiate. Repeat, the Deathworlders are—" Then nothing. Silence hung heavy in the air, a terrible, suffocating void where words should have been. Commander Adrienne Talos felt the chill settle in her chest as she turned toward the communications officer. "Trace the source." How? Lieutenant Reese was already working, fingers flying over the console, his brow furrowed as the analysis scrolled across the screen in cascading waves of green light. It originated from the Epsilon 9 research station. Last known location, Orion Spur, Sector 22-T41. Adrienne exhaled slowly. Sector 22-41 was an isolated outpost, positioned near the Deathworlder border, a remote facility meant to monitor their movements from a safe distance. There had been no indication of hostility, no warning that something like this was about to happen. But now, an entire station had gone dark. She turned sharply to the tactical officer. "Did we detect any fleet movements in that sector?" Ensign Davos hesitated before nodding grimly. Long-range scans picked up multiple warships departing the Deathworlder homeworld 3 days ago. Trajectory analysis indicates they're headed straight for the core systems. 3 days. They had been moving for 3 days and no one had noticed. Adrienne's pulse quickened. The Deathworlders were a species known across the galaxy for their brutality. They came from a world so hostile, so unforgiving, that only the strongest of their kind survived to adulthood. Their biology was different from most known species. Denser, faster, stronger. Their tactics were ruthless, their wars swift and absolute. The Galactic Federation had avoided direct conflict with them for centuries, relying instead on a tenuous balance of power. Treaties had been signed, neutral zones established, all in the hope of keeping the Deathworlders contained. But now, all of that meant nothing. They were mobilizing, and the distress call from Epsilon 9 made one thing painfully clear. This was not a border skirmish. This was war. Adrienne pushed the thought down and straightened her shoulders. Panic would get them nowhere. "Get me Admiral Rains," she ordered. "We need to alert the Federation Council immediately." Reese nodded and sent the priority transmission. A few seconds later, the main display lit up with the Admiral's image. Rains was older, his features hardened by years of military service. His expression was grim before Adrienne even spoke. "We received a distress call from Epsilon 9, she said without preamble. "They're gone. The Deathworlder Fleet is advancing on the core systems." Rains absorbed the information with a slow nod, as if he had been expecting it. "How many ships?" "We don't have exact numbers yet, but the preliminary scans indicate a full-scale mobilization." Rains was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "We always knew this day would come," he muttered, then louder. "Commander, return to Solus Prime at once. The High Council must be informed." Adrienne nodded, already turning to the helm officer. "Set a course for Solus Prime, maximum FTL." The order was met with an immediate response, and the Valiant surged forward, engines humming as they accelerated into the void. A war was coming, and the Federation was not ready. Far from the core systems, in the cold and dying light of an aging sun, the Deathworlder Fleet prepared for war. On the bridge of the Reaper's Wrath, Supreme Warlord Kethrak watched as his armada assembled. Hundreds of warships, forged in the brutal conditions of their homeworld, drifted into formation like the segmented spine of some vast cosmic beast. The sight was magnificent, a testament to the unyielding will of their people. The time had come. "Supreme Warlord," a voice rasped behind him. He turned to see his second-in-command, General Varlock, bowing his massive battle-scarred head. "The fleets are in position. We await your command." Kethrak's lips curled back, revealing serrated fangs. "Our enemies believe themselves civilized," he growled, voice low and dangerous. "They build their fragile worlds and hide behind treaties, thinking words will protect them." He turned his gaze back to the endless expanse of ships. But the galaxy was not built for the weak. He gestured toward the tactical display. Holographic projections of the Federation's core worlds shimmered before him, each one a carefully cultivated paradise, their inhabitants soft from centuries of peace. The thought filled him with contempt. "They have stagnated," he continued. "They have forgotten what it means to fight, to struggle, to endure." His claws tapped against the steel console. "It is time they remember." Varlock inclined his head. "Your orders, Supreme Warlord?" Kethrak pointed to the closest target. "Epsilon 9 has already fallen," he said. "Burn it to the ground. Leave nothing but wreckage." Varlock bared his own fangs in response. "And the core systems?" Kethrak's gaze darkened. "We march. Let the Federation tremble." As the command echoed through the warship, the Deathworlder Fleet surged forward, engines igniting with the fury of a dying sun. Their conquest had begun. On Solus Prime, the Galactic Federation's High Council gathered in the Great Hall. The chamber, a vast structure of gleaming metal and intricate holographic displays, was filled with the murmurs of diplomats and military officials. At the center of the room, the main display showed the latest intelligence. Red markers spreading across the star map like a growing infection. "This is an act of war," High Chancellor Varen stated, his normally composed features etched with concern. "We cannot reason with them." Ambassador Ylara, her pale features tense, shook her head. "We must try. If we escalate, this will turn into a war we cannot win. The Deathworlders—" "Already at war with us," General Sator interrupted, his 4 eyes blazing with fury. "They have razed Outpost Epsilon 9, slaughtered civilians, and are now advancing on our core worlds. We must mobilize now." The chamber erupted into chaos, voices rising in heated debate. Admiral Rains, silent until now, stepped forward and pressed a command on his wrist console. The star map shifted, revealing the Federation's defensive formations. "Our forces are outnumbered," he said plainly. "Their warships are built for attrition. Their soldiers are trained for brutal ground combat. If we engage them in a direct confrontation, we will suffer catastrophic losses." He paused before continuing. "However, we may have another option." A hush fell over the room. Uttered, "And what do you propose?" Chancellor Varen asked. Rains exhaled. "A decapitation strike. If we can locate and eliminate Supreme Warlord Kethrak, we may destabilize their war effort before it reaches the core systems." Ambassador Ylara looked horrified. "Assassination?" Rain's gaze was unyielding. "Survival." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Chancellor Varen finally spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "Do we have a plan?" Rains nodded. "I'm assembling a strike team now. We have a narrow window before the fleet reaches our borders." Varen turned to the assembled council members. "Then we have no choice." The vote was cast. The mission was approved. As the chamber emptied, Rains stood alone for a moment, staring at the crimson markers on the map. The Deathworlders were coming. And if they failed, the Federation would burn. The bridge of the ISS Valiant was awash in dim light, the glow of the central display casting ghostly reflections across the faces of the officers. Commander Adrian Talos stood motionless, hands clasped behind her back, eyes locked onto the data streaming in from long-range sensors. The Valiant was fast, but not fast enough. The Deathworlder Fleet was closing the distance between them and the core systems, each passing hour bringing their warships closer to the heart of the Galactic Federation. Adrienne's mind raced. The Federation had fought wars before, territorial disputes, civil conflicts, even the occasional rogue AI rebellion, but this was different. The Deathworlders weren't just another adversary with grievances to negotiate. They were something else entirely, something that defied the rules of conventional warfare. They didn't fight for resources or political gain. They fought because it was in their nature. She turned to Lieutenant Reese. "Status on the Federation fleet." Reese didn't look up from his console as he responded, his voice clipped and precise. "Mobilization is underway, but we're stretched thin. Half of our battle groups are positioned along the outer rim, dealing with pirate incursions. The core world's defensive fleet is assembling, but they won't be at full strength by the time the Deathworlders arrive." Adrian's stomach tightened. It was worse than she thought. "Any word from Admiral Rains?" Reese hesitated. "He's en route to Solus Prime, finalizing the strike team. The Council approved the operation." She nodded, unsurprised but uneasy. A decapitation strike was a bold move, and the only one with a chance of working. The Deathworlders had no centralized government. Only the strong ruled, and if Kethrak fell, it was possible the invasion would collapse before it truly began. But if they failed... A sharp ping from the tactical station interrupted her thoughts. Ensign Davos straightened in his seat, fingers dancing over his console. "Commander, we're picking up a distress signal. Faint, but definitely Federation in origin." Adrian moved swiftly to his side, eyes scanning the data. The signal was coming from a drifting vessel in deep space, just outside the Epsilon 9 wreckage zone. A lone survivor? A trap. Life signs? Faint. One humanoid, barely registering. Adrienne exhaled slowly. If someone had managed to escape Epsilon 9, they could have vital intelligence on the Deathworlder Fleet, tactical data, fleet composition, weaknesses. Or it could be nothing. A corpse left floating in the void, sending automated distress pulses into the emptiness. She made her decision. "Bring us in, shields up, prep a medical team." The Valiant shifted course, engines flaring as they altered trajectory. The wreckage of Epsilon 9 soon came into view, a graveyard of shattered metal drifting against the endless backdrop of stars. Twisted remains of once proud structures spun lazily, illuminated by the soft glow of emergency beacons still flickering in the dark. And there, among the debris, was the source of the signal. A Federation scout ship, barely intact, its hull blackened and ruptured. Adrienne's gaze hardened. "Bring it into the hangar bay." Tractor beams latched onto the wreck, guiding it into the Valiant's docking bay with careful precision. As soon as it was secured, a medical team rushed in, scanning for survivors. Minutes passed, tense and stretched thin. Then, a voice crackled over Adrian's comm. "We have a survivor." She made her way down to the hangar, heart pounding. The medical team was clustered around a stretcher, working quickly to stabilize the figure lying atop it. The survivor was humanoid, Federation personnel, judging by the tattered uniform barely clinging to their frame. Burns covered one side of their face, and their breathing was shallow, but they were alive. Adrienne crouched beside them. "Can you hear me?" The figure's eyelids fluttered, revealing bloodshot eyes. Their lips moved, voice barely a whisper. "They're coming." Adrienne leaned closer. "We know. We need details. What did you see?" The survivor coughed, pain twisting their face. Not just warships." A tremor ran through their body. "They have something else. Something new." A chill ran down Adrienne's spine. "What is it?" The survivor's breathing hitched. "Superweapon. Prototype. I don't..." Their bodies spasmed, and the medical team moved in quickly, administering stabilizers. Adrienne stood, jaw clenched. A superweapon. If that was true, the Federation situation had just gone from dire to catastrophic. She turned sharply to Reese. "Get this data to Admiral Rains, now." Kethrak watched the battlefield unfold before him. The devastation of Epsilon 9 displayed in perfect clarity across the Reaper's Wrath's command console. The station had been reduced to nothing but drifting wreckage, its inhabitants wiped from existence as efficiently as a flame snuffing out dry leaves. It was as it should be. He turned his gaze to the prototype ship stationed at the fleet's core. It was unlike any warship the Deathworlders had ever built. Sleek, dark, predatory. Where their traditional warships were designed for brute force engagements, this one was something else entirely. A hunter. Varlock approached, his expression unreadable. The prototype is ready for deployment. Kethrak's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Have we confirmed its effectiveness? Varlock gave a rare smile, sharp and cold. The test subjects did not survive. Kethrak let out a low, satisfied growl. The Federation still believed they could fight this war with fleets and soldiers, with strategy and precision. They had no idea what was coming. They will not see it, Kethrak murmured, his voice almost reverent. They will not know until it is too late. Varlock bowed his head in agreement. The core worlds will fall before they can even understand what hit them. Kethrak turned back to the star map, watching as the invasion force crept ever closer to the Federation's borders. Then let us begin. On Solus Prime, the High Council chamber was a storm of voices. Arguments clashed in the air like blades, each diplomat, general, and strategist trying to make their voice heard over the others. The crisis had escalated beyond anyone's control. Admiral Rains stood at the center of it all, stone-faced and silent. He had just received the latest intelligence report from the Valiant, and if the data was correct, the situation had become exponentially worse. When the council members had exhausted themselves, he stepped forward. "The Deathworlders have a prototype weapon," he stated flatly. Silence fell like a blade. Chancellor Varan was the first to speak. "What kind of weapon?" Rains exhaled. "We don't know yet. But the survivor from Epsilon 9 was terrified. That tells us something." Ambassador Yalara swallowed hard. "We must attempt negotiations. If they have a new weapon, we may not have the means to fight it." General Sator scoffed. "Negotiations? Are you blind? They do not negotiate. We must strike first." Varan's expression was unreadable. "We are running out of time." Rains met his gaze. "Then let me handle it." Varan studied him for a moment before nodding. "Proceed with the strike team. Kill Kethrak." The council members murmured amongst themselves, but the decision had been made. There was no turning back. Rains left the chamber, his face set in stone. His orders were clear. If this mission failed, the Federation would be lost. He activated his comm. "This is Admiral Rains. The strike team is a go." Across the Federation, elite operatives were already moving. The hunt for Kethrak had begun. The black void of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant glow of dying stars and the faint shimmer of nebulae. The Deathworlder Fleet moved in perfect formation, a shadow creeping toward the heart of the Galactic Federation. They did not rush. They did not need to. The Federation would come to them soon enough, scrambling to defend their borders, desperately trying to delay the inevitable. On board the stealth cruiser Nightfang, Supreme Warlord Kethrak stood in the war chamber, surrounded by his most trusted commanders. A massive holographic display flickered in the dimly lit room, a three-dimensional rendering of the Federation's defenses. Fleet movements, supply lines, emergency distress calls. It was all laid bare before them, a fragile network of desperation. "They may well attempt to intercept us soon," Varlock grumbled, his broad frame casting a long shadow against the wall. "The latest intelligence suggests their battle groups are repositioning. They are abandoning the outer colonies to reinforce the core." Kethrak bared his fangs in amusement. "The prey runs to its burrow when it senses the predator's presence. This was expected." Varlock nodded. "They are also mobilizing a strike team." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "Purpose?" Varlock tapped a claw against the hologram, zooming in on a heavily fortified station orbiting Solus Prime. "They are coming for you, Warlord." A low chuckle rumbled through Kethrak's chest. "Desperate." He turned toward the assembled officers, his tone shifting to something colder. "Let them come. Their strategy is predictable. They believe that without a leader, our forces will crumble. That is their weakness." His voice dropped to a near growl. "They do not understand us." Varloc's gaze darkened. "What are your orders?" Kethrak reached out, gripping the edges of the war table as he studied the battlefield. His claws dug into the metal. "The strike team will attempt to infiltrate and eliminate me. We will set a trap. They will not return." A flicker of anticipation moved through the gathered commanders. There was no fear in the room. Deathworlders did not fear battle. They welcomed it. "Deploy the Phantom Reavers to shadow the enemy strike team," Kethrak continued. "Let them believe they are undetected until it is too late. When they move, we will be waiting." Barlock grinned, a savage expression that spoke of violence to come. "As you command." The room emptied as the orders were relayed, the wheels of war turning ever forward. Kethrak remained still for a moment longer, staring into the void of space. The Federation believed they were fighting for survival. They did not realize they were already dead. The Federation strike team assembled in silence, their faces grim as the mission briefing played before them. Admiral Rains stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding, his voice sharp as a blade. "Make no mistake," he said. "This is a kill mission." The room was filled with some of the most elite operatives in the Federation, spies, assassins, special forces. Each of them had been chosen for their specific skill sets. Each of them had faced the impossible and survived. But even among them, the Deathworlders were an unknown factor. Their physiology was beyond anything the Federation had encountered. Their bodies were stronger, their reflexes faster, their minds honed by millennia of war and survival. A single Deathworlder warrior could tear through an entire squad of trained Federation Marines. And they weren't up against just one. They were facing an empire of them. Rains continued, his gaze scanning the room. "Supreme Warlord Kethrak is the key to their war effort. He is more than a leader. He is a symbol. Remove him, and we throw their entire command structure into disarray." One of the operatives, a veteran sniper named Voss, leaned forward. "Do we have intel on his location?" Rains nodded. "Our best intelligence places him aboard a stealth vessel near the front lines. We've identified possible docking points and blind spots in their sensor grids." He brought up a layout of the Nightfang, a sleek predatory vessel armed to the teeth. "We infiltrate, eliminate Kethrak, and extract before their fleet realizes what's happening." A pilot named Kira scoffed. "And if they do realize what's happening?" Rains met her gaze without hesitation. "Then we don't come back." The room was silent. They all understood the stakes. Rains turned to the last member of the team, a former Deathworlder defector named Kale. His presence alone made the others uneasy. He was one of them once, a soldier who had turned against his own people, now serving the Federation. Kale met Rains' eyes, his expression unreadable. "This will not be easy," he said simply. Rains nodded. "Nothing worth doing ever is." No more words were needed. The mission was set. The Valiant moved through the darkness of space like a shadow, running silent as it approached the Deathworlder Fleet. The strike team was already prepped for deployment, weapons checked, minds sharpened. The tension in the drop bay was thick, the hum of the ship's systems the only sound cutting through the silence. Adrienne adjusted her combat gear, her thoughts focused entirely on the task ahead. She had faced impossible odds before. She had led men and women into battles they were never meant to survive, and yet this felt different. This felt final. Kale sat across from her, his massive frame making the drop pod feel even smaller than it was. He was calm, unshaken. "You don't seem worried," she noted. Kale's lips curled slightly, the closest thing to amusement she had seen from him. "Worry is wasted energy." Adrian nodded. "So, what do you suggest?" Kale met her gaze, his dark eyes unreadable. "You must understand what you are walking into. This is not a Federation war. This is a Deathworlder war." He leaned forward slightly. We do not fight to win, we fight to end. Adrian swallowed. There was something chilling in his words, something that made her pulse quicken. Before she could respond, the drop light flashed red. They had arrived. The team moved into position, their bodies tense, weapons at the ready. The Valiant's AI initiated the breach sequence, guiding the drop pod toward the Nightfang's weak point, a maintenance hatch on the ship's underbelly. The moment the pod latched onto the hull, the doors hissed open and the team poured out, moving swiftly and silently. The corridors of the Deathworlder ship were dark, lined with strange, unfamiliar technology that pulsed with a faint, ominous glow. Adrienne led the way, following the schematics they had memorized. They had one chance, no mistakes, no second tries. They made it 3 corridors in before the ambush hit. It was fast, brutal, a blur of motion and gunfire. Deathworlder warriors erupted from the shadows, their sheer physicality overwhelming. Adrienne barely had time to react before she was thrown against the wall, a massive hand closing around her throat. Kale moved faster than she thought possible. He drove his blade into the warrior's side, twisting hard. The Deathworlder barely flinched, but the distraction was enough for Adrienne to break free, her sidearm flashing as she fired point-blank into its skull. The battle was chaos. The team fought hard, but it was clear they had walked into a trap. The Deathworlders had been waiting. Adrienne's heart pounded as she saw Voss go down, his body crushed under the weight of a Deathworlder brute. Kiera screamed as she was dragged into the darkness, her rifle flashing one last time before silence took her. Rains was still standing, fighting with the brutal efficiency of a man who had already accepted his own death. Gale grabbed Adrienne's arm. "We have to move. Now." They had lost the element of surprise. The mission was compromised. Adrienne clenched her jaw. "We get to Kethrak. We finish this." Gale hesitated, then nodded. They ran. The corridors blurred around them, alarms blaring, footsteps echoing in pursuit. They reached the war chamber, the doors sliding open with a hiss. And there he was. Kethrak stood at the center of the room, calm, waiting. He smiled. "I was hoping you would make it this far.